all these names sound good. We're going to try and draw two different lines here to kind of help with that. One is the person creating the RFC is essentially, it's your responsibility for coming up with what you want the naming to be. So it's not an open canvas that a committee then has to decide. It's much more like, here's what I think, and if anyone has any concerns, they're still welcome to express them. The other thing is also having the bar for PR approval to be basically allowing for consensus with the caveat that naming can be decided during implementation. So going into an implementation with a best guess, but then still having that like, well, let's see what this looks like, and we can kind of confirm as a part of the PR review process. Here's our best guess, here's what we want, but if that helps people get to an agreement sooner, sometimes it's just kind of hard to know what these things look like when you're talking about them in abstract. So that is one thing that we're going to try and do moving forward, is just have that option open of consensus around naming. Both putting more responsibility on the RFC creator to have a stance about what they think it should be named, the syntax, etc. But then also having consensus be able to be reached without a full 100% must be this, giving a little bit more ownership to the implementer to resolve as a part of implementation. The other thing is just starting to be more specific. We're just saying we started a couple RFCs, call back out, be more specific about only using this call to talk through things that have been, essentially ironed out in the discussion. So, if you create an RFC an hour before this, we aren't going to talk about it during this meeting. There is some legwork that can happen in the issue that lets everyone do it asynchronously on their own time without taking up all of our time. So, as if you're ever creating an RFC, just know there can be some discussion that happens before, and maybe even it gets resolved before we get to RFC. The RFC call is meant for, there is a design here, there is the implementer, the person who wrote the RFC has a sense on how this should work. We can certainly discuss things that need to be discussed, and the goal there then wouldn't be like, this is going to get agreed to. It'd be more like someone's looking for feedback, not a consensus on moving forward. So there is still space for something that isn't really figured out. If talk about it, those will just be handled a little lower priority, towards the end of the meeting. And also, it clears us up to not be trying to figure out these outstanding issues during the call. Much more about, we can discuss if we want to discuss, and we can come to consensus, but not try and do both at once. Anyway, that's again, something about this RFC process brings out the consensus process kind of manager part of my brain. So, thank you all for letting me ramble about that. It's been fun kind of figuring out this process as we go. All right. If y'all can't see, let me know. I'm also not watching. Actually, no, that's not true. I can move chat over here. And we will get started by just going down the agenda. First thing here was something that came up from TC. I see you on the call, so if you want to present this, you have kind of 60 seconds to do so.
All right, so the idea is that it's a low-level API of sorts that can create files. Any file type, maybe an image, maybe a text file. And the main motivation is one, for the image component, it would be very great to not be bound, even if we manage to import image tools or similar, to not be bound by it. So it's not the only option. For example, if you want to use GIMP, you can. And also maybe to shorten or to pass along data between different pages, different JavaScripts, it would be very great to fetch the data from a pointer, for example. Yeah, so that's basically that, I think.
Awesome. Yeah, there's a lot more info here. If you haven't had a chance to read it, it's linked to in the RFC. It sounds like you kind of found the images that Caleb sent it. A good conversation here that I actually haven't had a chance to look at yet, so I'll be super willing or have much to add here. Is Drew on the call? I don't see Drew. So TC, I'd be curious if you have anything, what are you looking to get out of this? If we chatted about this, they're still in the process of trying to find out what the perfect API is for this.
Fred, I think you're sensitivity in your mic is a bit too high. You keep cutting out for me.
Oh, thank you for that call out. Let me see. Testing.
Yeah, it's a bit better. Thanks.
No problem. There's, of course, of all days, there's also a gardening crew on my neighbor's yard, so I think that's probably not helping you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was trying to say, TC, is there anything, given that I haven't really caught too much up on this, what are you looking to get out of kind of the discussion? Is there anything that you have as an open question? You feel like this is the right API, or feedback?
I think the API can stay basically the same, but one thing I'm trying to figure out how to make this work in a more like lower level in the Astro itself. But I think with Astro Resolve and similar, I can probably piece it together. I haven't had time to think to look deeper currently.
Yeah, I mean, I can give some early feedback from me, which is just two things. One is we have a lot of trouble with Astro. Like the idea of the component script inside of an Astro component is that it is something that runs for every component render. So you kind of get this scope of the component instance. That makes it hard to do stuff like this, which is astro.allocate file, because it's something that would get called, naively it would get called every time the I think having components responsible for creating other components, I think that's where that becomes a little tricky. It's not impossible, but it's certainly a little tricky.
Yeah, because I guess.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
I think because something similar, I think, can be done if you use template literals with something like style tag, where it will still get hoisted out of the CAD and into its own CSS file, and maybe something similar with files itself.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's not impossible. We have different ways of doing it, but it's a little tricky. The other thing I would say is that we borrowed a lot of our routing engine is based off of Svelte kits. It would not be hard to add Svelte kits endpoint support, which, if you haven't seen it, is this idea of. Just pull it up real quick. Oh, look, I even have it here. Is probably the thing I'd check the most, because I've thought about this a bit. They have this idea of essentially having something like this format, which is not .astro in our world or .svelte in theirs. It's file extension .js. And what that means is that it's basically like they will create a page that is this URL. And
yeah,
for them,
I think that was.
Oh, sure. Yeah, for them, it's like there's get, there's post, there's delete, there's all this different support for them. But for us, because we're a static site builder, it would just be like, yeah, this is the body of the response, the file that you want here. It's a string. The file extension is encoded here, and then you just return the string for the proper value.
Yeah, I think that was actually one of my alternatives, and I see ways that is actually better, for example, with something like htaccess or versal.config. So I think there is value in both approaches.
Yeah, I definitely, I saw you wrote that here, so I definitely zoom in on it as well. That was the reason I bring it up. I think I would probably prefer that, just for the idea of having your routes all in one place, right? Everything /pages/star is a file in your final response. So I do like the idea of that in your final response. If you had a lot of files, I could see how this API would be much better, right? If you had like 10 files that all got modified at the same time, having them all here in one place, obviously that's a little more ideal.
Yeah,
so here for just like how you can create multiple, we don't have a plugin infrastructure I'll call out as well. Like there is an idea of, if we had a plugin infrastructure, right? Add plugin, and what this plugin could do is create files in your project. Would that help answer the problem? Like, would that be something that you could do, is in your config file, add a thing that created files and it was just plugged right into your config? That's the last thing I'll bring up on this.
Yeah, because I think the Great File API is great for what was it, the dynamic routes, where you, for example, have an article and you want a downloadable version of it, like a PDF.
Right.
Would this also work as like maybe instead of part of Astro, part of Snowpack? Just thinking about it, because Astro, most of what Astro does is bundling, right? And Snowpack actually has the ability to do all to create new files, to bundle new files and all that. Would it not also work well as a possible Snowpack like plugin or something like that?
Oh, that's a great point. No, so in Snowpack we don't have that ability. We've talked about it a lot of like adding a file to your build. Vite has that, so that's something that like maybe we could. We've talked. Yeah, there's a pull request I think, or even an issue in the Snowpack community for doing that. But I know Vite supports that. It's something that makes sense. Like, hey, here's a plugin. Add the file to your final build. I would say like right now you could get away with this. Well, no, you couldn't because it's all, yeah, you wouldn't get this file hashing and bundling the same way you have here. I was going to say you could do this out of band somehow, you know, like after your build runs, add a file to your final build directory, but you wouldn't get the same, obviously, connection to some of these things. The other thing.
Well, my early.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah. My early proof of concept just fs write file into the public directory, and that worked actually.
Oh, nice. We did just do some work to remove bundling. The public directory was never meant to be bundled, so I think those files are just now going to go over, you know, one-to-one, not touched.
Yeah,
Right,
so
his point
maybe
is that-
yeah, but I don't know how clean that would be from a lot of perspectives actually.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, this is definitely something that I've been thinking a lot about. But yeah, this is the first time looking at this. I don't think I have much more than just helping out, push the conversation.
I definitely think there's a use case for both the Svelte kit endpoints. I need to read about that more. But like the endpoints API and a more like astro.create file API that you can call within a component. Because like with an image component, you want the API to just be call this component, pass it the URL to this image, and then it'll automatically generate all of the different files and whatnot. You don't want to actually know, where those files are. You basically just want like an image renderer, in effect,
Yeah.
Whereas I can imagine the endpoints being used for, before we have like JSON feed support, it could be used for, creating JSON feeds for your blog and other, custom file types that you might want to add to your website programmatically with all the data.
Yeah, one thing I'll say, because I think this is one of those things where I get the use case you're creating your essentially like image component, which is awesome. I think the way we've been thinking about this was the idea of adding the image component to core first. So having a much clearer idea of like integrated right into Astro is this idea of like, I want to use an image, I want to look at this file that's somewhere in my source directory. And something like what you're proposing here, which is, something that creates multiple resolutions, it optimizes automatically, being built directly into Astro. I wonder if the right ordering of this, so this is more of a just kind of way to approach the same problem, would be looking to build that as a build-in to Astro first, where instead of concerning ourselves about what's a public API, we think about what's the best way to implement this image component. And having the full kind of tool set of like, this is built directly into Astro, you don't need to worry about the public facing multiple use case, like just worry about this exact use case that you described. And then once that's ready, we could then look at okay, now great, how can we open this API? If the only use case we have right now is doing images, I think there is already an RFC, or at the very least, a lot of discussion enough to know that I think what we're trying to talk about, a goal is to have a built-in image. So if the motivation for this is creating your own image component. I don't know if that is the right way of looking at the user-facing API versus could we just look at the image component on its own and build the perfect API for that first, internal, not worry about the user-facing extensible API.
I think that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I think, I don't know, maybe something like the endpoint API would still be useful, and from what I get, it would be easier to implement too. So I can try and do that. I don't know if that's better.
Yeah, I mean, if you're interested in working on that, I think Matthew has been doing some research and has a lot of thoughts about that. I think everyone kind of has everyone's very excited about it. So I feel like you'll get a lot of in from everyone if you wanted to work on that. If it could help, we could definitely catch up after this and set up like what are the kind of goals of that project, what are the things that we want to accomplish, and I'll try and find the issue. I can even try and do that now. I think there's an issue out there for images that has had a lot of this conversation going. You've probably already found it, and the Discord community as well. Yeah, like this is more, I think, where I'd like to see that conversation go around what is the perfect API for, how do you reference the file so it can live in your directory? What does the image component API look like? Does it return a picture or an image itself? How does it work inside of other frameworks? That sort of thing. This has had a lot of conversation, more so in Discord these last couple of days.
One last thing. Is Astro ever being planned for Deno support? Because if we are planning for Deno support, we might run into some issues with the way this is kind of set up.
Did you say Deno? D-E-N-O?
Yeah, Deno. Yeah, I know there was the conversation about adding Deno support a while back, but I don't know if we already definitive, like maybe version 2 or something like that. I don't know if we have any definitive plans for that. If we do, as it is right now, it may cause problems. It's very node specific.
That's a good call out. I don't think there's any plans right now. We're too dependent on Snowpack and the like lower level build engines. What we have talked about is you output, like essentially when we go to work with a component, like an SSR server that actually runs on the server. Having that be Deno runnable would be I think where we want to start that conversation. But we control building that, so I think that's a little. Yeah, I think John's also bringing up some great kind of thoughts on this in the Discord community, in the Discord thread. Bundling multiple inline SVGs, I think he's starting to identify some of those use cases that would only work. You don't want to create a different file for every SVG if you have multiple. So let's keep this conversation going. I want to move on and make sure a lot of time here. But this is like 100% something that everyone's excited about. I think it's such a big task, doing it the right way and approaching it the right way so that we get the best API possible. If you want to follow up, with Matthew after this about the image component specifically, and I'm sure he'd love to talk about that.
I think I'll try and more focus on the other use cases that are not images, for example, the JSON feeds, as someone mentioned already, and see where that goes, because there are already conversations about images, and yeah.
Yeah, I think so there's kind of two different use cases here. Right, the images, you're taking one file and creating a bunch of different ones potentially. As opposed to just the one endpoint, which is kind of the Svelte kit approach, which that is super useful for JSON files, or I've used it for spitting out RSS feeds, that kind of stuff, where you're taking data from the build process and spitting out just one file for that endpoint, rather than the image component, which kind of does a bunch of stuff. Yeah. But the endpoint would be a huge feature to have. That would be excellent.
Yeah, I actually totally agree with that. If someone could create a focused RFC on that, like it can literally borrow as much from SvelteKit as we feel comfortable. I would love to talk that through, because I don't think that's well optimized for this creating image components story. But I do think that's for how do you create a JSON file? I actually think an RFC came through this morning about creating a JSON like RSS feed. And that would be a way to solve that without having to build in every single story into Astro itself. So yeah, +1 on, I'll say, kind of alternative mentioned. Svelte kit, endpoint, style, support, interest in a dedicated RFC. Yeah, and Tony, if you want to either help TC with that, or yeah, if you want to take that over, if you two can work through that. But yeah, a dedicated RFC just look for it, I think would be really valuable.
Okay, yeah, I can definitely help try and figure out what would go in that RFC, and then as far as just the size of it would depend on if it's something I can pick up right now or not.
Yeah. Again, because we basically pulled in a lot of that Svelte kit routing logic and then removed the endpoint support, adding this as a PR would actually be pretty straightforward. It would essentially be adding that was already added to work in this code base originally.
Yep.
Like we pulled in their license, we did everything right on the open source side of things, so that this could be easy to add in the future.
Go back through the Git history, right click on the commit that removes the endpoint support, revert commit. It's done. Feature completed.
It's not that easy, but it's close. Cool. TC, thanks for creating that RFC. There's a lot of good stuff in there. I'm excited to keep working on it.
Yep, thanks to you too.
Awesome. This one is really for Nate, and he's not here, so I actually wouldn't want to go through this without them, so I might just defer this to next week. I will just say I think Nate's on board with this. I kind of wanted to bring this up to push him to say publicly that this would be the future behavior. As he's working through the compiler, support works, it was essentially handled at build time, not runtime, and so that was how it enabled the idea of like markdown based and enabled all the way down a component tree. That created a couple of bugs in the advanced use cases, and then also was just, I think, confused for a lot of you, this idea of a markdown component impacting all the way down a component tree, what was going on. So I do believe he's on board with this. I don't think we can get anywhere without him. So I just wanted to flag that for people to see, and we can move on.
Good question.
Yeah.
So is this going to be like an option on the markdown component itself where you can specify whether or not you want to be recursive? It's just going to be like completely remove the recursive aspect of it from the markdown component.
No, so I think this would be a new default behavior. I don't know if it's going to be possible to make it an option or not, because it was so built into the idea of running this at build time or runtime. So literally when you're compiling the file, turning it down versus leaving it all as is. And then when you go to generate the image, at actual build time, runtime, having that be when the markdown is rendered and displayed as HTML. Again, I'm like paraphrasing like side comments that Nate has made to me. So again, I don't have enough info to answer much here. I will make sure that he's online next week and we can bring this back up.
Okay.
But this issue he's definitely listening to. There hasn't been too much activity on it. Clearly, we've tried to bring it up a couple of times and it's always been bumped to the bottom. So feel free, again, this is linked to in the RFC. Feel free to come in here and ask questions. I see Nate assigned, so you will definitely ping with them.
Tangentially, I feel like this kind of is related to like wanting to add an ASCII doc component or a LaTeX component, where there's the question of like, should the children of a component always be valid Astro syntax, or could there be a way to indicate like, this is Markdown now.
Yeah.
This is now LaTeX, which actually, now that I'm saying that that's an entirely other topic to talk about.
Style has that lang equals ability to do Sass, so yeah, I kind of see what you're getting at there. That would be interesting.
Right. Because I think there is a use case to keep the recursive nature, because like if you're writing Markdown on GitHub, you can add a like details and summary element and then write Markdown inside of that details element, which would be disabling, I suppose.
Give me nested Markdown components, so there would be a little bit more work there, but yeah, that use case certainly is still supported. Just maybe a little bit more in this shallow Markdown world.
On top of the Markdown component, I currently the Markdown component doesn't support plugins, right? So if you normal Markdown supports plugins, but the Markdown component itself doesn't. Is there a specific reason why we do that?
Do we not? I think we do.
No, it actually really doesn't. I
We-
checked it out. I actually had to create a custom setup in order to actually get plugins working.
Yeah,
Markdown.
so we're supposed to be able to add in plugins, but when you do, it throws away all of the built-in.
Oh no.
I was actually looking at this just the other day because I was
Oh
gonna add.
no.
I was gonna add in one of the plugins for putting IDs on all of like section headers,
Yeah.
but I didn't feel like re-hooking back up Smarty Pants and
Yeah.
Mark Slug and all that.
That's a pretty aggressive default behavior. We should probably at least make that configurable, that they get added on versus removed.
Yeah, related to that, I was going to suggest creating like a Astro remark preset, if that's an option. So you can just extend the default remark plugins and then add on the extra ones that you want.
I didn't know that they supported presets. That was always such a Babel and like ESLint thing that I think worked really well. I would love.
I'm not entirely sure that they do, but I'm pretty sure that they do.
Okay, I'm just gonna take notes in Discord instead. So give me 1 second. Yeah, I'll record that there. I would love to come back to that. Let's move on. Again, I don't feel like I can be very effective championing this without Nate here. And yeah, we'll just push to next week. But please, all of these comments that are coming up, leave them in this thread or in ideas and suggestions. This is all great stuff. I'm just not the person to answer any of it. Cool. Let's actually, you know what? I'll just knock this one out soon as well, because again, I thought Nate would be here. I think he showed this demo in Discord. He might have sent it to a couple of people privately. I'll ask him to send it if he hasn't yet. I think he is implementing this as a part of the new compiler, having a way to define variables in your script and style tags also. So in style tags, actually having access, so you can do something like, style color equals and then variable with a string value. Super cool if you can get it working. This was, again, just a chance to throw that out there. If he was here to talk a bit more about it, but he's not. So that's just a kind of cool teaser for what I hope he's going to demo in weeks. Again, if you have any thoughts or comments, please leave it in the issue. Obviously, very exciting stuff.
Actually, quick touch on the previous scripts, using scripts as values. Tags.
Yeah, sure.
Does this work for like JSON and stuff like that? Like JSON, let's go again. JSON LT. I actually don't remember the proper name for it. The JSON for SEO and stuff like that. Will this actually work for it as well?
LD JSON.
Art script. I can't remember the exact type name for the JSON file.
Yeah, it's
SEO
LD LD JSON, I believe.
LD, yeah.
This wouldn't work for that, I don't think.
That's unfortunate.
Yeah, please ask that as a question in this issue. We can follow up there. Again, Nate's not here, so I don't, that's a great question. Please ask it there. I think someone will answer. Cool. This one, actually, I think we're ready. I'm going to attempt to get consensus on this, Doug. This is something I created last week, which was a chance to replace Prism with a package called Sheet. I presented this last week. I'll just give a summary. This has come up a couple of times in ideas and suggestions, and in dev, there is this library called Sheet, which, let me just pull it up, is a very nice syntax highlighter. Obviously, who cares about your syntax highlighter? Aren't they all the same? What makes this one special is two things. One, it uses VS Code's syntax highlighting directly, so anything that is supported by VS Code gets that exact same grammar built into it. So in Prism, because we built our own Astro syntax, there's still sometimes issues with that in our own compiler for the Prism components. We see that on the doc site sometimes. This instead is getting, for every language that's built-in support, the actual grammar that comes from VS Code. So much better battle test. And I think there's like 100 plus built in. So unlike the world where you have to kind of add your own plugins, and, Prism is kind of about managing these as plugins, almost adding support in. This is much more like, yeah, everything's built in, and it just kind of works, which is super cool. The other thing it does is it supports any theme from VS Code as well. So it has a couple of good ones built in, but it also just lets you bring your own themes as well. These are going to be much higher level of detail than Prism. So Prism, by running on the front end, it only basically has access to a couple of tokens, like this is a comment, this is a string. Shiki runs at build time, so it actually has the full theme and the full, again, the grammar that comes from a VS language grammar schema. The result is that literally you can, some themes style markdown links differently from markdown headers, differently from, a template string variable versus a variable. Really high level of expressiveness in the template that you just can't match with. So a bit more stable, a bit more expressive, and still same 0 runtime output. The basic way this works is that at build time, it actually generates your HTML for you. You can kind of see it here, code to HTML. And that has all the colors attached. So the other really nice thing is that this isn't leaking CSS in the project. There's no idea of okay, bring in a theme file and bring in this Prism CSS file. Right now, our current Prism just involves a lot of whether you want to extend it or just bring it in, you're kind of polluting these global classes into your project. What's really nice about this is everything is inline style because it's basically the responsibility of this code to HTML generator to return an HTML string that is styled. So there is no classes because it all gets generated in it, again, at that higher level of expressiveness. It gets generated at build time. So you can see that here. So that was the main pitch here. We had a quick little run through of this last week. It's getting a lot of good feedback from the Vue community, and the TypeScript community's gone all in on it. 100 plus built-in languages, a bunch of really good themes. That whole idea of using inline styles, not polluting. What I'm looking for, if we can reach consensus on this, is basically this plan to migrate from Prism to code in time for Vue 1.0. So code being powered by Shiki, Prism being what we currently have powered by Prism. If we can't reach consensus on this, I would at least like to reach consensus on phase 1 about adding this to the project, but I'm going to attempt for the full kind of Monty here. The one thing before I stop talking and open this up to the floor is the thing that really came out of this conversation was lack of dark mode support. So the downside of having everything at build time is, okay, well, what if I want to switch the styles based on some client-side flag, I click the dark mode. If this creates everything and it's all inline hard styles, obviously you can't flip it after the fact. You need some runtime JavaScript to do that. I actually ended up working with the Shiki team on, let me see if I can find, I'll just show this. You can go see the PR, but they just merged this which is essentially a theme called CSS variables. So it's like any other theme, you use it, but instead of creating, actually, let me just I'll jump to the PR. Yep, so this was just merged this morning. Instead of creating that, how do I not? I thought I highlighted this one. Okay. Anyway, instead of using inline styles in the style tags of the different spans and different things that are created, the color is essentially instead talking to a CSS variable. So you actually then have the responsibility and the ability to style these variables. So you get access to these tokens, you can style them by default, and then you can have a dark mode that kind of kicks styles into dark mode. So what's really nice about this is you kind of get the best of both worlds. For someone who doesn't care about and just wants a really simple basic theme, they get that, no worry about CSS, you get all the benefits. And then if you really want dark mode support, you just opt into the CSS variables theme. So theme, it's not custom actually in the final landing, it's CSS variables. Although we could certainly call it custom, we can call it whatever we want. But once you use this, then these get output to the final thing, output to your page, and then you are responsible for defining these separate. And that would give you dark mode support. So if you don't want it, you don't worry about it. If you do want it, it's available to you. Really excited that I got them to land that, so that's really, really glad that they were able to do that. It's a good solution for their community and to leverage it, obviously, ourselves. Yeah, so obviously I'm still interested in kind of what are the reasons to keep Prism around. Again, I'm not saying like throw Prism out today, but I think there's enough here now that it makes a pretty objective case for moving to this as our V1 target. So I can scroll back up and we can talk about this a bit. The basic idea being add this today. There is the idea of setting a global theme, which we still want to land. I think that is certainly, as long as everyone feels comfortable, like let that be a see, because we've talked about the idea of having global settings, global values stored. But assuming that that can be, separately tackled, then we would unlock stage 2, which is to start to move over to this. There's a remark plugin, so it's pretty straightforward to do that inside of Markdown. And then phase 3 would be removing it. All right, I'm done yapping. I think that's pretty much a good high-level view of where we're at. Does anyone have any concerns with this?
I like the custom theme, but is there a way of converting like the already built-in like VS Code themes to the custom variables? Is there a system for that? Or do you have
So that's the one downside with going for this. You would generally want to use the built-in themes or any VS Code theme whenever you can. But if you need this dark mode thing, the reason you can't do that is the VS Code themes are much more detailed. So you see what we have here, right, is we have basically 12 tokens or so. VS Code themes can go like, there are hundreds of different variables and variables for each theme. So what we did was we basically took the most general forms of them and turned them, you can define a theme as detailed as you want. So we basically forked a really minimalist theme and turned the colors that they defined into these variables. So you can't go from anything to this. It's really like yeah, a fuzzy bear says 1,800 tokens. I don't know if that's the case, but yeah, something like the Nord theme that's the default, I think has upwards of 100 rules, probably like 50 or so possible colors. Some of them are special to Markdown, some of them aren't. Some of them are special to certain languages. They're like really, really can't go from that to this more general system. I know, I really wanted that too. I mean, it speaks to how powerful it is, but yeah, it's a bummer. You could translate, you could create this pretty quickly by just looking at what comes out of Nord. And be like, all right, cool, background is this color, foreground is this color. You could fill these in basically yourself. And yeah, John, I don't know if that's what you're talking about here. John just asked, can we bundle our own theme? The idea is that you could define these inside your root, and then you could define a prefers dark mode or prefer color scheme, and then define different variable values. So you're able to off. I might be misunderstanding. I'm not sure if prefers dark mode is what it's called, so maybe you're talking about something different from what I'm talking about. Oh yeah, here I can show if it helps. They have their themes outlined here, so here's what's built in. Docs, themes. These are the available themes that are built in. So no cost to the final site by selecting one of these. And then you can also load your own theme separately. There's an API for. And again, if there's something that you love and think should be pretty open, so they just wanted to allow this to select a few. Yeah, I'll ask again, is there any around the plan and moving towards Shiki as our V1 type? Cool. Do we have consensus on this plan?
Yeah,
Any objections to consensus, I should say?
I guess we need more encouragement to finish those themes off, so that way there's Astro themes to work with. A Shiki plugin probably kill us out.
Yep, exactly.
Oh, does Shiki have I mean, I suppose Shiki does have Astro support since we have a TextMate language, but grammar. But how does that work?
That was about a week ago. My first PR to them was adding Astro as a built-in. So regardless of what, making sure this was built in. Yeah, it's really cool. It's as simple as just basically telling them where our TextMate grammar lives. So anytime we push an update, it will get pulled into this in some future release. I don't think they're releasing nightly, but basically every time they release, they update all of their grammars. So if we ever make a change or an update, that's what'll happen. Cool.
Awesome.
Yeah, so I can't stress enough just like how nice it is to like one less thing to maintain and worry about anytime we put it into VS Code, which is something that we care about a lot in our community. It gets a lot of eyes on it. This will get that update automatically for free, which is really sweet.
I'm really excited to see this out in wild. You know, make it usable and get the feedback from people actually using it.
What was the first part of that? Wilden?
I'm excited to see it on latest.
Oh yeah.
And usable.
Yeah, my only feedback, Fred, is that I think you answered most of my concerns in the issue, so I'm good with everything. Just as long as we commit to Phase 3 being out by 1.0. For 1.0, I think it'd be weird to be in kind of like a half state where either both of them were in there or Prism was ripped out without a migration path for those users. Because I mean, I disagree a little bit because I do think this is a little bit of a personal preference thing, and most of the other static site generators let you pick your own syntax highlighter. So as long as we have that capability, which I think we do now, and we can get through Phase 3 for 1.0, then it's all good for me.
Yeah, that's a great call out. This last line I think is important. This isn't about removing Astro and Prism support. If you still want it, we should still have a Prism component. And then I think, yeah, that's to your point about having customization of Markdown. I guess I actually don't see that here, but if that's done part of, I guess that'd be Phase 3, Phase 2. Making sure that there's a way to control this, although I think we already have. Going back to our current setup for, right, would this solve that already? Basically adding remark dash Prism, I guess it would be.
It could be. That's not how we inject Prism currently, but it may be.
Okay. I'm happy to make that a requirement for Phase 2 or 3.
Cool.
Definitely for at least for Phase 3.
It could be a good thing to see also just kind of what the success goal is for Phase 2. Once we have Prism and Shiki sitting next to each other, what do we look at to say, yep, this worked, we're good to pull Prism out as the default and move with just Shiki for 1.0?
Yeah.
And that could be something as simple as saying that it works for the docs site. The docs does dark and light mode and has some custom stuff. So we might just say if it is implemented well on the docs site, that's good enough.
Yeah, that's a great point. Let me start taking some notes. Let's make sure it's custom. While I type this, John, I see your comment in the thread. John writes, just a question about theming. I mean, if I use the color scheme responsive styles for me, I'd be willing to help with that if it doesn't. So that kind of gets to, I think if I'm understanding your question correctly, that gets to the comment about by default, the themes are so detailed, there isn't a way to ship them down as CSS rules. That's the reason why they encode them in as inline colors, because it's too much to ship as CSS. So there isn't by default any sort of color scheme responsive style. That's if you need color scheme, if you need responsive styles for the colors like dark mode, then you would reach for that custom, or I think what they landed was CSS dash variables, and you'd get this out, and then it's on you to style it. I think that's what you're asking, but feel free to correct me. Tony, that was you bringing up the idea of what is a success metric.
Yep, that was me.
Cool. Cool. I'm gonna let John type a little bit more, but otherwise I'm gonna. Yeah, exactly. Okay, I'll ask you, given those two comments about adding a success metric to something like, you know, are we happy about it on the doc side, and maybe want to do on community for phase 2, and then for at least phase 3, having, you know, making sure there's a way to customize what you mark down. So if you wanted Prism as an advanced use case, you could reach for it. Given those two comments, do we have consensus? Is there any objections to consensus? Excellent. All right. We'll mark this as approved, and I will clean up my PR for a review to get started on phase 1. Yeah, I mean, I'm sure I haven't been super secret about it. I'm very excited about this one, so really excited to get this one up. It's a really nice syntax highlighter that I'm very happy with, at least as I've used it so far.
Yeah, it's really cool that they're sharing so much stuff with VS Code, because VS Code has so much support. And they've just been really responsive, which is a good thing to see as well, because if we do want or come up with ideas for like adding better dark theme support kind of stuff,
yeah,
they might be very open to growing it in that way.
Yeah, I'm really glad they merged, even though this was as they improve basic first version, it'll only get better. Cool. I think we're pretty much left. If anyone has anything to call out, please. I'll just use this time quickly to mention we have this. We might have even shared this at the end of last meeting, so maybe we're starting a theme here. But I just wanted to call out we are doing some good work on. Basically, this is the passive AV1 launch. There's a lot of stuff that's to finalize here that's a little bit bigger than others, but overall we're trying on the core team on this list of tasks and anything that kind of pops up. John, I can't remember if you added this or maybe I think you said, oh, I would love. I'm realizing actually I might have done that a little bit ambitiously. So John, if you could just, you know, handle our NPM story, that'd be great. No, I'm just kidding. I've been doing some work on that. We can join on that.
Sorry to bother you about your mic again. I think the noise is messing with when your mic activates.
Yeah.
Would you mind trying to use push to talk?
Yeah, we're at the end of the meeting, so I won't.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
But no, I apologize for any mic issues.
Got like 50% of your last spiel.
Okay, push to top very quickly. Yeah, apologies for any mic issues. Just want to make sure people saw this. And yeah, that's it for me.
Question.
Yep.
When you wants to release version 1 by? Like December of this year, maybe spring of next year. What's the goal for release?
So the goal is getting this list of tasks done. Once these are done, we're pretty much ready to go. I would never commit to any timing publicly. I know in talking from some of the other core maintainers, I think, you know, getting an RC ready by October would certainly be very much in the cards. So, you know, really you're looking at the task list. There won't be much added to this. And then these nice to haves are kind of, you know, if the community can step in and help. Maybe image component gets bundled up to a V1 just because it seems to have so much buy-in, but other than that, this task list is pretty, I wouldn't say finalized and nothing could be added to it, but it's pretty inclusive, it's pretty complete. Yeah, you can see everything here kind of has an owner, someone working on it currently, or someone working on it to some extent currently. So, as soon as these tasks are ready, we're all pretty excited to get a V1 out into people's hands. Fuzzy Bear asks to share this publicly. It is currently pinned in the issue board, so it should be pretty easy access. But if someone else wants to link to it, that would be great too. I'm going to jump out of stream sharing. All right. That's it for me, y'all. Appreciate everyone who joined and was a part of the conversation. As always, this is super, community powered. So having you all here, not just talking to a blank room is super exciting. So thank you all for being a part of this. If there are any other questions, we got 1 more minute. Otherwise, I will see y'all in cyberspace.
All right. Thanks for running the show, Fred.
Yeah.